Protocol Labs conferences, and here with you, Anna Tutova, co-founder of Coins Telegram, and our guest, Juan Benet, who is inventor of interplanetary file system, IPFS, and he is as well founder of Protocol Labs, the research and development company between Filecoin and IPFS, and as well he is founder of Filecoin, the largest data storage decentralized network. Great to have you here, Juan.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be in the channel.
So can you tell us about your background and when did you discover crypto, Bitcoin first?
Yeah. So I started distributed systems at Stanford in the US. And I, very early in like 2011, 2010 or so, I got to know Bitcoin. It had been going around as another cryptocurrency. There have been many cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin in the cryptography community, but none of them have quite succeeded. And yeah, I remember like mining some Bitcoin at the time and so on, but didn't think that much of it because there had been many cryptocurrencies. And it was really in kind of 2012, 2013, once it kind of broke through a lot of adoption barriers that I dove much deeper into the space and looked at the adoption and so on and what you could actually build with Bitcoin and so on. So yeah, that's kind of when I got into the space. Around the time, things like Ethereum were being invented and so on. I kind of invented IPFS around that time period. And IPFS came from a different spot, not cryptocurrency. It came from thinking about distributed systems, file systems, networking, and how do you move around information on the web. But because I knew a lot about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I thought about using the mining process of Bitcoin to then store and distribute the data on IPFS. And so that's where Filecoin comes from. So Filecoin is a way to incentivize the distribution of data on IPFS.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. And did you keep crypto, Bitcoin during the time before
totally.
starting your own crypto company?
Yep.
And how did you discover it that early? Did you hear from friends, or did you just search on the web and found
Yeah, so I heard about it from friends. We used to, this is kind of like very kind of academic circles where we would look at a lot of papers, and Bitcoin became a thing that we heard about and reviewed as yet another paper. There's tons of like new innovative things going around academia all the time, and so sometimes some of those things turn into really big things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Filecoin and so on. Sometimes those things are, nothing becomes of them until much later. So before Bitcoin, there were about like 5 to 10 other cryptocurrencies that just didn't succeed.
So it's probably were called just like e-money and etc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and did you run any other companies before starting Filecoin?
Yeah, so the company's Protocol Labs, we work on projects like IPFS and Filecoin. I started a company called Loki Studios before, and we made games. We made mobile games. Yeah.
So do you work currently with the games then?
Not as much anymore. So I'm super deep into a lot of tech. I am involved in some games in the crypto and Web3 space. There's one in particular that is an MMO. I can't really talk about it because it's all very private still, but there's like a major MMO that I'm involved in.
So does Filecoin support it? Or what's
so a lot of the
angel investing?
Both. Like the tech is going to use IPFS and Filecoin and so on, and very excited about the game. Yeah.
And you started as well IPFS as well, particularly for the storage of science data. And
yes.
You see as well quite a big combination of the real world data and as well blockchain and crypto. So can you tell more about this and to which other use cases did you evolve?
Yeah. So I started IPFS because I wanted to move around large-scale scientific data sets. So think of large-scale machine learning, training data sets, or there are many important, really valuable data sets that either scientists come up with or governments come up with and so on, that you want to be able to do long-term data analysis and you want to track the provenance of and so on. And so categorizing, archiving, storing, and distributing data is a pretty hard problem in science, and in data science and analytics and so on, and deep analysis and whatnot. And so I wanted to build tooling and systems that would make it way easier for communities of scientists to be able to categorize the data, gather it, store it, archive it, reference it, and so on. Because when you link things in the web, that link is likely to change and like the data is likely to be lost. And so I wanted to create a more permanent structure so that all of the data could be could be kind of permanently identified and permanently addressed and distributed. So yeah, that's where IPFS came from.
And can you share some of the clients? Like I know you work with Harvard University Library,
Yeah.
and as well with some other universities for genomics data. Maybe you can share.
Yeah, so
some
there's a lot of different users for both IPFS and Filecoin, and so IPFS is think of Filecoin as like a subset of the IPFS network, and so a lot of there's some massive scale data science users, including those universities, others like Berkeley, and even the Atlas experiments at CERN, which is one of the biggest creators of data on the planet. And so yeah, those are some of examples of lots of different clients. There's hundreds now, thousands of different clients that are bringing different kinds of data sets and using the network to store the data and distribute it and so on. And all of this is stored on individuals or small on the machines and hardware of individuals and small companies. So one of the really cool things about cryptocurrencies is that you can create this cloud infrastructure out of the hardware and machines of people in their homes or in their offices or in data centers, but not necessarily like this kind of centralized cloud companies, but instead create a cloud system that all of us can contribute to.
So how can people sign up for providing their facility to the Filecoin?
Yeah, so just go online to search for Filecoin on the web, and you can find how to go and start storing data. You download code that runs the mining client or like the storage providing client, and then you start storing data and so on. So depending on the hardware that you have and depending on where you are, you might want to do different types of jobs. So for example, if you have like kind of consumer style computers and so on, and you're kind of like very well connected in a city, then retrieval providing is the better fit. So this is where your computer acts like a CDN cache node and is able to serve things to users very fast. Or if you have maybe very fast internet and a lot of hardware, so think of like a few hundred terabytes or a petabyte or more, or 10 petabytes, then that's more of a professional setup, and then that in a data center would be the best fit. And then at that point, that's for storage providers. So you can think of storage providers as the groups that are storing and archiving the data safely, and then the retrieval providers as the users that are helping serve it very, very quickly.
And do you work as well with any governments for their data storage?
Yeah, so there's a number of governments that are starting to use the Filecoin network to store and archive their data sets. So I know of at least a few. So one was like there was a program with New York, the city of New York, and archiving a bunch of valuable data sets there. I've heard of some other governments in Europe. There's a lot of government data and data sets that is stored in Filecoin and distributed. There's a lot of open data sets that are distributed this way. So data sets from NIH and NSF and like lots of different agencies around the world.
And how are you different from Arweave, for example?
Arweave is very small. So like Arweave is and I think I'm not super up to date with the latest in their network, so I can't really speak to it. But Arweave is more about achieving perpetual storage of a small data set. And so you can think of something like Arweave as working on top of Filecoin or something like that, where you can think of like all of Filecoin storing all of Arweave as well. Yeah.
And why do you think that data should be stored in decentralized way? And do you think in the future all the data will be decentralized, or will we have two systems still?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the web started decentralized from the beginning. So hyperlinks on the web are decentralized by design. The cloud became like this large-scale centralized place, but it's kind of abnormal or different from the origin of the web. So this is really just a return to decentralization, away from centralization. The big thing is just making sure that the links are content addressed and that you can store anything anywhere, it doesn't matter, and the link doesn't have to change. So today links change depending on the locations of servers and where things are stored. And it would be great to get to data that doesn't have to change that way. So yeah.
And as well, like you have big competitors already, centralized ones, like Amazon, AWS, Microsoft, and so on. So like what are your competitive advantages advantages, and as well, how is your pricing different from those centralized data?
Yeah, so the good news here is that using cryptoeconomics, we can achieve a way cheaper price than the centralized cloud providers. So Filecoin is 1/10 or lower cost relative to the large players like AWS or Google Cloud and so on. So that's a huge success thing for Filecoin. There's a lot of features that those providers have that Filecoin doesn't yet have. And so over time, the network will be building those out. And so depending on how cost sensitive a user might be or how many features they need, it will make sense for them to join Filecoin at different points in time. So right now, early adopters are the ones that either are really price sensitive, so the cost really matters to them, or they really care about verifiability, like being able to have cryptographic proofs that the data is being stored long term, or that are aligned with the notion of creating a data commons that everybody could add and contribute data to and distribute around the world.
And I've seen as well that the biggest number of ZK verifiers pass through Filecoin. So
Yeah.
can you tell more about this and your general view on zero-knowledge proofs?
Yeah. So Filecoin is like the largest zero-knowledge machine on the planet. We do more zero-knowledge proofs than any other network. And the way we use zero-knowledge proofs is that we need to prove that the data is being stored. And so we have a scheme that we call a proof of replication. And so the way that works is that a storage provider commits to store some data for the network, and then produces the storage provider is challenged by the chain to prove that they are correctly storing data, and so they produce a zero-knowledge proof of the fact that they're storing that, and that gets checked every day. So every day, storage providers must prove that they're continuing to store the data on the network, and so that's where all the proofs are coming from. So the initial setup of the proof of replication and the verification over time.
And in terms of adoption of ZK, it's still quite early. However, this technology have been already from the last century.
Yeah.
So what use cases do you see in the future, and how?
So I think ZK has a ton of use cases. So everything from being able to make blockchains private, so you have privacy when it comes to transactions or social networks or things like that, to being able to store and encrypt records and being able to store and distribute information for many groups. And so there's tons of different applications for zero knowledge, and more every year. I'm also very excited about fully homomorphic encryption, which is another technology kind of like zero knowledge, which is kind of further out. That's what's really going to give us full privacy over all computation.
So can you explain it more? How is it different from ZK?
Yeah, so zero-knowledge proofs tend to be cryptographic proofs that are, where the zero-knowledge part is in usually, the way that they tend to be used is that there's some secret key that some proof is being constructed over, and they tend to be used to prove that computation has been done correctly. So the zero-knowledge in ZKP doesn't tend to be used for privacy of the broad data set. It's just used to hide, be able to prove something to the rest of the world without having to reveal it. Fully homomorphic encryption, FHE, is a different technology which is similar to zero knowledge, but the way it works is that the computer itself, the computation the computer itself is doing, is private. So you can give the computer a set of ciphertexts and an encrypted function, and the computer can run the encrypted function over the encrypted data and produce an encrypted result. And the computer never knows what the result actually is, but you know the function was applied correctly. And so that is, of course, very computationally intensive and so on. But it's a way to get to kind of this potential future where we can use cloud services and cloud systems without those services ever knowing anything about the data that you're storing with them. So ideally, we can use all of this stuff to build things like social networks and repositories for personal data and so on. Because you shouldn't, when you use computers, you shouldn't have to give all of your data to these centralized providers that can look at it. It should be that only you and the people that you share your data with should be able to access that information.
And what other trends are you excited about?
Yeah, so zero knowledge, fully homomorphic encryption. Really excited about blockchain scalability things. So things that kind of roll-ups and scalability, blockchain scalability schemes, consensus protocols, and so on. And also everything related to AI. So the latest things with large language models or generative AI and so on. So it's a ton of like really compelling use cases there.
Do you apply AI somehow in Filecoin?
Yeah, totally. So people are starting to use Filecoin to organize AI computing systems. So you have a project called Lilypad where you can use a model, an AI model that is stored on Filecoin, and you can invoke the model to do an inference run. So you can prompt it to either do generative AI type of use cases or large language model use cases, where you orchestrate the entire invocation of the prompt through Filecoin and FEM, and then the provider computes the result and gives it to you. So that's like super exciting. And kind of the next step after that is being able to kind of generalize that for broad infrastructure for all machine learning systems. And that down the road, even doing training. So one of the things that's hardest and most expensive in AI and ML is to train these large-scale machine learning models. So being able to kind of use the Filecoin compute cloud to be able to do that is kind of what a lot of people are excited about.
And how do you think will AI change the industries, both traditional industries
Oh,
and
man.
blockchain and crypto, let's say in
Everything.
5 years?
Oh, in fact, yeah, I don't know, everything. It's like, this is one of those things that is extremely difficult to predict. Just what we've seen today with the latest GPTs, so like GPT-4, for example, is so tremendously powerful. I think we're extremely close to general intelligence. And so at that point, all kinds of work that currently can only be done by humans will then be able to be done by a lot of these tools and systems. And so it's going to just have this massive impact throughout the economy. I think the coming AI changes are going to be as impactful as all of computing. Like it'll change the world that much again. So think of the world before the internet, think of the world before you had computers, how everything had to be done by hand or in typewriters or in papers or whatever. Like that transition from that world to now, we're going to do again, but with AI systems. And kind of in the extreme, then it might be something even deeper, like just broader. Once you create intelligent agents, it's a whole other landscape of possibility. So probably for another channel, another conversation, another point. But yeah, I think the future is going to be very different.
Yeah. And as well, you had regulatory challenges with CSC recently, but now Ripple partly won the case. So other coins should be not considered now securities. So can you tell how do you
No, so I generally don't talk about this stuff. The regulation worldwide is very pro-crypto. So there are tons of countries in the world that are extremely pro-crypto. I think the U.S. is just going through a complicated time where the government is divided. There are large parts of the government that are pro-crypto, large parts of the government that are against, and so on. So we sort of think that this will sort itself out over the next few years.
And in terms of your clients, both private and public, where do you see the most activity, the biggest interest in adoption of decentralized data storage?
Yeah, so I think groups that have massive scale data, so where and groups that really care about the data sticking around long term, so or groups that care about how lots of groups use the data, so being able to kind of build data commons around the data. So that you can kind of do all of the data analysis in larger communities. So this is why scientists make a ton of sense. Kind of the next group after that is like large-scale enterprise companies that have an enormous amount of data, and they want to be able to enable all of their participants to work on that data.
Are you in talks already with any big?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies around the Filecoin ecosystem that are already in talks with many of those. Yeah.
Great. And can you share as well some latest news of Filecoin and Protocol Labs?
So. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in Filecoin. Like, I can't even keep track of it myself. There's just so much going on. Some of the stuff that I'm most excited about is, again, like things on FEM. So FEM is a smart contract layer on Filecoin, and so tools and systems that allow computation to be issued through that. So that's where I've been like super focused. I know that there's a lot of groups growing the DeFi capabilities of Filecoin to be able to support storage providers in accessing capital and so on.
And can you share as well some plans for the development of Filecoin, some upcoming news?
So some of the stuff that I'm focused on is in blockchain scalability. And so I want to get blockchains to be able to scale to billions of transactions per second. So that's kind of what I'm very focused on.
So are you bullish more on ZK, optimistic rollups, maybe?
That's a good question. I think they have different uses. So I do think that optimistic computation is going to be required for large scale, for really hitting like the very large scale of computation. However, they have bad latency guarantees, and so optimistic rollups will be used where cost matters more than latency. So when latency matters, so you want a result really quickly, that's when zero knowledge is going to be way, way more important.
Thank you for sharing
Great.
your thoughts and the news about Filecoin, protocol
Yeah.
apps, and IPFS with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.